Practical arrangement only. He showed it to no one. He mailed it to a placement agency in Chicago, paid the fee, and went back to work. His foreman, a weathered man named Dutch Halsey, found out 3 weeks later when he saw an incoming reply letter on the kitchen table. Dutch picked it up, squinted at the return address, and set it down with a sound that was almost a laugh. "You ordered a wife," Dutch said. "I made a practical arrangement," Stellan said, not looking up from the ledger he was working through. "That's the same thing." "It's not." Dutch scratched his jaw. "She know what she's walking into this ranch this winter. This—" He gestured around the kitchen, which hadn't been properly cleaned since before Stellan's mother passed. "This situation—" "She knows it's Montana," Stellan said. "That should tell her everything she needs to know." Dutch left without another word. Stellan finished his column of numbers and moved on. He didn't allow himself to think about it more than that. Thinking too much led to feeling too much, and feeling too much was how men made mistakes in this territory. The land didn't care about your feelings. The cattle didn't care. The weather god, the weather especially, didn't care. Stellan had learned that lesson at 22, when he'd inherited this land from a father who died before teaching him half of what he needed to know, and he'd nearly lost it twice in the first 3 years through a combination of bad luck and worse decisions driven by emotion. He wasn't going to do that again. He needed a capable woman to run the household, to help stretch provisions, manage the domestic side of operations, and free him up to focus on what he was actually good at: the cattle, the land, the numbers. That was all. Anything more than that was a complication he didn't have room for. The agency wrote back that they had a suitable candidate. Her name was Clara Falcon. She was 29 years old, had experience in domestic management, and was described as capable, determined, and well-suited to frontier conditions. The agency noted that Miss Falcon had specifically requested a placement in the Northern Territories, not the Eastern settlements, not the Southern towns. She wanted remote. She wanted wilderness. That had given Stellan a moment's pause. Women who specifically requested remote wilderness were either running towards something or running away from something. And in his experience, neither option made for an uncomplicated partner. But he'd already paid the fee. And the alternative was another winter alone with Dutch Halsey, and the kind of silence that had a weight to it. He confirmed the arrangement. Clara arrived on a Tuesday, which was already an inauspicious beginning, because Tuesday was cattle count day, and Stellan was in the East Field from 5 in the morning. Dutch drove the wagon to the billing station alone. Stellan was still checking figures when he heard the wagon come up the drive. He didn't look up immediately. He finished his count 412 head down from 417, which meant 5 were somewhere in the North Gully, or something worse, and only then walked back toward the house. The woman standing beside the wagon was not what he'd pictured. He realized too late that he had pictured something. Some vague idea of a woman who would arrive tired and grateful and overwhelmed by the scale of the place. Someone who would need 2 or 3 weeks just to find her footing, who would be so absorbed in the strangeness of this new life that she would ask nothing of him but direction. Clara Falcon was not tired. She did not look overwhelmed. She was standing in the dust of the drive, looking at the main barn with the focused expression of someone doing a rapid assessment, the way you might look at a problem before you started solving it. She was tall for a woman, carrying a single large trunk and a smaller bag over her shoulder, which she had apparently wrestled off the wagon herself before Dutch could assist. Her coat was practical heavy wool, sensible cut. Her hair was dark and pinned back efficiently, not decoratively. When she heard Stellan's boots on the ground behind her, she turned. She looked at him directly, no hesitation. "Mr. Voss," she said. Not a question. An identification. "Miss Falcon," he said. "Clara." She didn't extend her hand, which told him she'd read the landscape fast enough to know it wasn't that kind of greeting out here. "Your east barn roof has 3 cracked support beams visible from here. You'll want to address that before snowfall." Stellan stared at her. "The main house chimney also has a partial blockage, you can tell by the smoke pattern. That's a fire hazard and a ventilation problem." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. "I'm not trying to start off on a difficult foot. I just believe in stating what I observe. He found his voice. You've been here approximately 4 minutes. 3, she said. Is there anything you'd like to show me, or should I find my own way around? Dutch made a sound behind them that Stellan suspected was laughter disguised as a cough. I'll show you the house, Stellan said, because it was the only thing he could think to say. She moved through the house with the efficiency of someone who had been in difficult spaces before and knew the fastest way to understand them. She didn't comment on the state of the kitchen, though he watched her take note of it. She didn't react to the pile of unprocessed mail on the study desk, or the fact that the storage room had been organized by someone who clearly operated on a system that no one but them understood, which was Stellan, and even he had lost track of it. She asked 3 questions. Where was the well? Where did he store the winter root supplies? Was the second bedroom the one she was meant to use? He answered all 3. That night she made a meal from what was in the larder: dried beans, salt pork, and something she'd done with the last of the autumn onions that made it taste like something other than hardship. Stellan ate without comment. Dutch ate with audible appreciation. Where are you from originally? Dutch asked her. Ohio, she said. Before that, Pennsylvania. Long way from Ohio. That was the idea, she said pleasantly. Dutch looked at Stellan. Stellan looked at his plate. After the meal, Clara cleared the dishes without being asked, then stood at the kitchen window for a long moment, looking out at the dark. Stellan was still at the table. He was watching her, though he didn't acknowledge it. The North Field, she said without turning around. Is that where you're losing cattle? He went still. What makes you say that? The fence line I can see from here bends at a strange angle at the far corner. Predators use breaks in the rhythm of a fence to locate entry points. Wolves primarily. She turned and looked at him. I grew up on a working farm before it stopped being a working farm. I know what a compromised fence line looks like. Stellan set down his fork. I have a man checking it tomorrow. You should check it tonight, she said. It was 12 degrees when we came in. A wolf pack won't wait for morning. Silence stretched across the kitchen. Dutch had stopped eating. Stellan stood, went to the hook by the door, and pulled on his coat without a word. He grabbed his lantern. He was halfway out the door before he stopped and looked back at her. You're right about the chimney, he said. I'll address it this week. Clara nodded once. I'll have the supply inventory done by morning. He walked out into the dark. She had the inventory done before breakfast. 6 pages of it organized by category: food stores, tools, livestock supply, dry goods with notations beside each item indicating current quantity, estimated days of supply at average usage, and a short list marked critical shortfall at the bottom. Stellan stood in the kitchen reading it while she put water on the stove. You did this overnight, he said. I don't sleep well in new places, she said. It seemed productive to use the time. He looked at the critical shortfall list. Lamp oil, rock salt, dried beef. 2 of the 3 items he'd been meaning to address and kept deferring. This is thorough, he said, and the words came out slightly more begrudging than he intended. It's accurate, she said. Thorough would have included structural notes. He looked up. She was not smiling exactly, but there was something in her expression, a slight tension at the corner of her mouth, that told him she was aware of the friction she was creating and was not particularly troubled by it. He folded the inventory and put it in his shirt pocket. I'll take this into account when I ride to town Friday. If you wait until Friday, you'll be short on lamp oil by Thursday, she said. There are only 4 functional lanterns in the house. You'll want that fixed before the stretch of short days. I know when the short days come, he said, voice sharpening for the first time. She turned and looked at him steadily, not defensively, just directly. I'm not suggesting you don't, she said. I'm telling you what I found. What you do with it is your decision, Mr. Voss. It always will be. I'm not here to run your life. A beat. I'm here to help you run your ranch. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee, which she had made, and set out without fanfare, and it was. he noted with something like reluctant admission, better than any coffee that had come out of this kitchen in years. He went to find Dutch to tell him to move the town run to Wednesday. The first real argument happened on day 6. It was about the storage system. Stellan's storage system, specifically the one Clara had clearly been rearranging on her own initiative without asking him. He found the root cellar reorganized, methodically, logically, in a way that made obvious sense by any objective measure. Everything was now accessible, labeled and arranged by frequency of use, rather than by whenever it had been put in. He stood in the doorway for a full minute before going to find her. She was at the work table in the kitchen mending a piece of harness leather that one of the horses had managed to damage. She looked up when he came in, read his expression. "The root cellar," he said. "I reorganized it," she said. Not apologetically, just stating it. "I noticed. I can walk you through the system if you'd like. Everything's cataloged." "I had a system," he said. "You had an arrangement," she said. "Your system was in your head. If you were injured or absent, no one in this household would be able to locate half the supplies we need to survive a hard winter. That's never been a problem before." "It hasn't been a problem you've noticed," she said. "That's different." He put both hands flat on the table and leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but he needed her to understand something. "Clara," he said, his voice measured and low. "When I brought you here, we made an agreement about what your role would be. You told the agency you needed a capable domestic manager," she said, not moving. "I'm managing, capably. I didn't ask you to change things that weren't yours to change." She set down the harness and looked at him directly. "Then tell me what I'm allowed to change," she said. "Write me a list. I'll follow it to the letter." A pause. "But if you want this household to function through 5 months of Montana winter without killing anyone through inefficiency, you might want to consider that some things that have always been done one way could be done better." The silence between them was taut enough to hurt. "You're very sure of yourself," he said finally. "I've had to be," she said. And something shifted slightly in her voice, just slightly, just enough that he noticed it. A fraction of something real underneath the composure. She picked up the harness and went back to the mending. He stood there for another moment. Then he straightened. "Show me the cataloging system," he said. "So, I understand it." She looked up, and this time there was something in her expression that wasn't quite surprise, but was adjacent to it. "Tonight after supper," she said. "I'll walk you through all of it." He nodded. He left. "Jog." Dutch caught him outside and walked beside him for a while without speaking. This was Dutch's way of indicating he had something to say. "Just say it," Stellan said. "She's not what you expected," Dutch said. "She is absolutely not what I expected." "Is that a problem?" Stellan thought about it. He thought about the inventory, the chimney, the fence line he'd checked in the dark that first night, and found, as she'd predicted, compromised at exactly the angle she'd identified. The 5 missing cattle in the North Gully, exactly where she'd suggested predator pressure would push them. The root cellar, which he had to admit, was now significantly more functional than it had been under his arrangement. "I'll let you know," he said. Dutch nodded sagely, which Stellan found irritating. "She's been here 6 days," Dutch said, "and this ranch is already running differently." "Better or worse?" Dutch was quiet for a moment. "Better," he said carefully, "which I imagine is the part that's bothering you." Stellan didn't answer that. On day 9, Clara found the accounts ledger. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been searching for a receipt he'd mentioned needing to locate for a feed supplier. But the ledger was in the same drawer, and when she opened it to check whether the receipt was folded inside, she saw the numbers. She closed the drawer immediately. She found the receipt. She put it on Stellan's desk where he'd find it. But she'd seen enough in those 2 seconds to understand something she hadn't known before. That night after supper, after Dutch had gone to the bunkhouse, and she and Stellan were working through the catalog system at the kitchen table, as they'd been doing each evening that week. She looked up from the page and said quietly, "How long have you been running a deficit on the North Herd?" Every muscle in Stellan's body went rigid. He didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then he said very quietly, "You went through my ledger." "I opened the wrong drawer looking for the Hennessy receipt," she said. "I saw 2 lines of figures before I closed it. I wasn't trying to intrude." He was quiet. She watched him work through some internal calculation about how angry to be. "The deficit," she said again gently. "Is it recent?" 2 years, he said through a jaw that was barely moving. "Since the price drop." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She looked down at the table. She understood now some things she hadn't understood before. Why the supplies had been cut so fine. Why the house repairs had been deferred. Why a man who ran 400 head of cattle was still doing everything himself with 1 aging foreman and no additional hands. "I'm not judging it," she said. "I've watched a working farm go under. I know what that does to a person." He looked up at her, and for just a moment, just a flicker, something behind his eyes was not carefully managed. "It won't go under," he said. "I know," she said, and she meant it, though she couldn't have fully explained why yet. "But I might be able to help with more than the root cellar." A long silence. "What do you mean?" he said. "The household expenses," she said. "There are inefficiencies, significant ones. If I can show you where the money is going, the waste, the redundancies, it might free up enough to take on a seasonal hand for the spring drive." He stared at her. "You're not a bookkeeper," he said. "My father was," she said. "Before the farm failed, I kept his books for 4 years. I know what I'm looking at." Another silence. Longer this time. "I'd need to see the full ledger," she said. "If you'll allow it." Stellan Voss, who had not let another person look at his accounts in 15 years, who ran this operation with the kind of tight-held privacy that came from a deep fear of being found wanting, sat very still for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the study, came back with the ledger and set it on the table in front of her without a word. She opened it. He sat down across from her. Neither of them said anything. Outside, the Montana wind came down from the mountains and hit the house like a wall, rattling the window glass. Inside, the fire held. The lamp held. And 2 people who had arrived at this table as strangers bent together over a column of numbers, and the distance between them, without either of them noticing, shortened by the width of a page. She found 12 inefficiencies in the first hour. Duplicate supply orders from 2 different vendors. A feed arrangement that cost 30% more than the billing's cooperative rate. A loan repayment structured in a way that was generating unnecessary interest. She didn't say, "You've been doing this wrong." She said, "Here's what this is costing and here's an alternative." By the second hour, Stellan was asking questions. Specific questions, the kind that told her he understood figures and was processing everything she was showing him in real time. By the third hour, they had a draft restructuring plan on 4 pages of paper beside the ledger. It was past midnight when she finally looked up and realized the fire had burned low. She stood to add a log. He stood at the same moment and reached past her to do it himself. Their hands were briefly in the same space, not touching but close. Both of them stilled for just a second. Then he stepped back. She stepped back. "You should sleep," he said. His voice was different from how it had been earlier in the week. Not warmer exactly, but some hardness in it had changed. "So should you," she said. He looked at the pages on the table. "If this works, it'll work," she said, not arrogantly, just with the same directness she applied to everything. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite name, something that wasn't gratitude, but was in the same territory. "Good night, Clara," he said. "Good night, Stellan," she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He didn't comment on it. He went to his room. She went to hers. But for a long time afterward, lying in the dark with the Montana wind pressing against the walls of the house, Clara Falcon stared at the ceiling and understood that something had shifted tonight. Not between them exactly, not yet, but in the shape of this arrangement, in what it might still become. She had come here running. She had not expected to stop. She closed her eyes. Outside, the wind found every gap in the old walls and tested each one the way hard things always do, looking for weakness, looking for the place where something might give. It didn't find one tonight. The restructuring plan worked faster than either of them had expected. Within 2 weeks of Clara's audit, Stellan had renegotiated the feed arrangement with the Billings Cooperative, consolidated the duplicate supply orders into a single vendor contract, and restructured the loan repayment schedule through a conversation with the bank that he said lasted 40 minutes, and that Dutch later reported had left the loan officer visibly rattled. "What did you say to him?" Clara asked when Stellan came back from town and set the new repayment documents on the table. "I said what you told me to say," Stellan said. "I showed him the figures. I presented the alternative schedule. I told him I'd take the loan to the Helena branch if he couldn't accommodate the restructure. And he accommodated it." A pause. "You were right about the interest structure. He knew it was unfavorable. He was just counting on me not knowing it." Clara picked up the documents and read through them. Everything was as she'd calculated. Better, even Stellan had managed to shave an additional point off the rate through sheer stubbornness, which she suspected had less to do with financial argument and more to do with the particular way he had of going silent and immovable when he'd decided something. "This buys you the spring hand," she said. "It buys us the spring hand," he said. She looked up. He was already moving toward the door, pulling his coat on, heading back to the work that never ended on this land. But he'd said it. Us. Without thinking about it, without weighing it, just said it like it was a fact he'd already accepted. She set the documents down carefully and went back to the bread she'd been making. Dutch came in from outside 10 minutes later, stomped the mud off his boots, and looked at her with the expression of a man who had witnessed something he found significant. "He whistled," Dutch said. "On the way to the barn. I haven't heard that man whistle in 4 years." Clara kept working the dough. "People whistle when they've solved a problem," she said. "People whistle when they feel lighter," Dutch said. "Not the same thing." She didn't answer that. But she was aware, in the way you become aware of a change in weather before it arrives, that something in the atmosphere of this place was shifting. Not dramatically. Not in ways that announced themselves, but shifting. The trouble with Harding Wills began on a Thursday. Wills was a neighboring rancher, third-generation land, twice the acreage of Stellan's operation, and a personality that had apparently been shaped by never having been told he was wrong about anything. He rode up to the property line with 2 of his men on a gray morning, and Clara happened to be the first one he encountered because she was checking the fence line in the east section exactly as she'd started doing every 3 days after the North Gully incident. She heard the horses and turned. Wills looked down at her from the saddle with the particular expression of a man who had expected to find a ranch hand and found a woman instead, and who considered this a kind of insult. "Where's Voss?" he said. No greeting. "Working," Clara said. "Can I help you?" "You can tell him Harding Wills is here. That'll help me." "I can do that," Clara said. "What's the subject of the visit? I can let him know when I pass the message." Wills looked at her like she'd asked a question that was slightly below his dignity to answer. "That's between me and Voss." "Then I'll tell him Harding Wills stopped by and didn't say why," Clara said pleasantly. "He'll know where to find you." She turned back to the fence line. There was a pause behind her that told her Wills was deciding how to respond to being dismissed by a woman holding a fence checker while standing in the mud. "You're the mail-order wife," he said. She didn't turn around. "I'm Clara Voss," she said. It was the first time she'd used the name out loud, and it sounded more settled than she'd expected. "And you're still on the property line, Mr. Wills, which means you're technically on Voss land. I'm going to ask you to move back 6 feet, or wait for my husband at the main house." Another pause. Then she heard the horses shift, and the sound of them moving away toward the main house. She let out a slow breath, and kept checking the fence. "Better row." Stellan found her an hour later. "Wills came," he said. I know. I sent him to the main house. He told me. Something in Stellan's expression was doing a complicated thing somewhere between irritated and impressed. He also told me you called yourself Clara Voss. She met his eyes. It seemed like the efficient choice. It did. Was there a problem with it? He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. What did you make of him? She thought about it honestly. He's used to getting what he wants through intimidation, she said. He came here about something specific. He wouldn't tell me what which means it's something he knows won't sit well with you. Stellan nodded slowly. He wants water access, he said. The creek that runs through the north corner of our land, it crosses into his upper pasture. He's been asking about a formal easement for 2 years. You've been refusing. I've been not responding, Stellan said. Which is different. Is it to him? He looked at her. What would you do? He asked, and she could hear that it was a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. I'd define the terms before he does, she said. An informal easement with no document is how you lose land in this territory. If you're going to allow the water access, get it on paper with limits. If you're not going to allow it, tell him clearly so he stops coming back and start planning around the consequences. The consequences, Stellan said, being a man like Will's deciding to make himself disagreeable. He'll do that anyway, Clara said. Men like that always do. The question is whether he does it with a grievance or just with his personality. A short silence. Then something crossed Stellan's face that was close to a reluctant smile, or at least the shape of one briefly. I'll deal with Will's, he said. I know you will, she said. And she meant it without condescension, which he seemed to understand because he nodded once and left without the edge in his shoulders that he'd arrived with. 3 days later, she overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. She'd come back from the barn earlier than expected because the task she'd been doing inventorying the winter hay stores had gone faster with the system she'd set up the previous week. She came in through the side door quietly, and Dutch and Stellan were in the kitchen, voices low enough that they thought no one else was in the house. Can't keep pretending she's just here for the accounts, Dutch was saying. I'm not pretending anything, Stellan said. You reorganized the workday around her schedule. I reorganized the workday around efficiency. You changed the town run day so she'd have access to the post. You started taking meals at the table instead of eating standing at the counter. You... Dutch. I'm just noting. I know what you're noting, Stellan said. His voice was flat. And I'm telling you, it doesn't mean what you think it means. A pause. What do I think it means? Dutch said. Silence. Clara stood very still in the hallway. She shouldn't be listening. She was going to stop listening in approximately 3 more seconds. She's good at this. Stellan said finally, and his voice had changed. The flatness was gone, and something more unguarded had replaced it. Add all of it. The accounts, the ranch, the way she thinks through problems. I didn't expect... He stopped. I made a practical arrangement. I'm not confused about what this is. Okay, Dutch said. Quietly. I'm not, Stellan said again. Clara moved backward to the side door, opened it silently, and went back outside. She stood in the cold for a solid minute, not thinking about anything in particular, just breathing the sharp air and watching her breath fog and disappear. Then she went back inside through the front door, making enough noise this time that the conversation in the kitchen had long since ended by the time she reached it. The letter arrived the following week. It came addressed to her, which was unusual enough that Dutch brought it directly to her rather than leaving it in the general mail pile. She saw the return address, and her hands went very still. Harlan Mace, attorney at law, Columbus, Ohio. She took the letter to her room and read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in the bottom of her trunk, and went back to the kitchen to start supper. She was quiet that evening. Stellan noticed she could tell by the way he watched her across the table the slight adjustment in his attention. But he didn't ask. He had a quality she'd come to respect. He understood the difference between silence that wanted company and silence that wanted to be left alone. This silence, she knew, was the second kind, and she wasn't ready to explain it yet. But that night, lying awake while the wind came down off the mountains in long sustained pushes, she thought about Harlan Mace and what his letter meant. He'd found her. She'd been careful, but not careful enough, and he'd found her. And the letter, polite and legal sounding on the surface, had said plainly enough between its lines that he expected a response, and that the absence of a response would not be interpreted as disagreement, but as an invitation to proceed. She pressed her hand flat against the quilt and breathed slowly. She had come here to escape a problem. The problem apparently had followed her to Montana. The tension started building in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not between her and Stellan, that was its own complicated thing, steadying and warming in ways she hadn't planned for. But between her and the reality of what she'd left behind, and between Stellan's world and the forces that were beginning to move around it, she noticed it first with Will's. He came back 3 more times in 10 days, always on some pretext, always with one of his men, always with that particular quality of presence that was designed to remind you that he was larger and more established and had been here longer. Each time Clara was the one who intercepted him first, because she was always moving around the property, and Stellan was always deep in work. Each time she dealt with him. Not aggressively, not with any drama, just with the same direct, unruffled manner she brought to everything, answering what needed answering, redirecting what needed redirecting, making clear, without raising her voice, that his presence required a purpose. The third time he looked at her for a long moment after she'd told him Stellan was unavailable. "You're not afraid of me," he said. Not a question, more like a realization. "Should I be?" she said. "Most people are," he said. "Most people let that do their thinking for them," she said. "Was there something I can pass along to my husband, or shall I tell him you stopped by?" Wills looked at her for another moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of recalibration. "Tell him I want a formal meeting," Wills said. "Proper conversation, both parties at the table. Not this." He gestured at the space between them, the improvised diplomacy of a chance encounter on a fence line. "I'll tell him," Clara said. Wills nodded once, which for him seemed to function as a form of respect, and left. That evening she relayed the message to Stellan, who listened without interrupting. "He wants to negotiate," Stellan said. "He wants to feel like an equal party," Clara said. "Which means he's feeling pressured from somewhere else. The water access is urgent to him in a way it wasn't before." Stellan looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because men like Wills don't ask for formal meetings unless they've run out of informal leverage," she said. "Something changed for him recently, something that made the creek water more valuable than it was." A silence. Stellan's expression shifted into the distant, calculating look she'd learned meant he was connecting something. "There's a railroad survey," he said slowly. "I heard about it in town 2 months ago. They're looking at routes through the valley. And a railroad needs water at regular intervals," Clara said. "The creek," Stellan said. "The creek," she confirmed. "If that land becomes a watering point on a rail line, it's worth 10 times what it is now. He's not after grazing access, he's positioning." The kitchen went quiet. Outside the wind had picked up again, and somewhere on the roof, a loose shingle tapped its irregular rhythm. "If you're right," Stellan said. "I'm right," she said. Not arrogantly, just with the certainty of someone who had read the same pattern in a different context and watched it play out before. He looked at her across the table. The lamp was low. His face in that light was difficult to read, but she'd been learning at the small markers of what he was thinking, when his expression was otherwise still. "Clara," he said. "Yes." "The letter," he said. "The one Dutch brought you, from Ohio." She went very still. "You don't have to tell me," he said immediately. "I'm not asking because I think I'm owed it. I'm asking because—" He stopped. Chose a different path through the sentence. "Because if there's something coming toward this house, I'd rather know about it." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had written an advertisement asking for someone invisible, who had wanted silence and got her instead, who had in 6 weeks reorganized the margins of his day around her without realizing he was doing it. "His name is Harlan Mace," she said. "He's an attorney in Columbus. He represents a man I was engaged to before I came here." Stellan waited. "The engagement was not something I chose freely," she said. "It was arranged by my father before he died. The man, his name is Orrin Pell. He has money. He has standing. And he decided that my leaving constituted a breach of agreement that he intends to pursue legally." "He can pursue it?" Stellan said. "You're a married woman under Montana law." "He knows that," she said. "He's arguing the marriage is invalid because it was contracted under duress." "Was it?" She met his eyes. "I came here willingly," she said. "Whatever my reasons were, I chose this. I signed the documents. I made the arrangement." A pause. "I just want to know that whatever this is between us, if it becomes a legal matter, I'm not going to bring damage to your land or your name." Stellan was quiet for a long time. The shingle on the roof kept its tapping. The fire held low and steady. "Let me see the letter," he said. She looked at him. "Clara," he said. "Let me see the letter." She got up, went to her room, came back with it, and set it on the table in front of him. He read it. She watched his face as he read the stillness of it, and then the particular quality of stillness that meant something had made him angry. Not hot anger. Cold anger. The kind that doesn't shout. He set the letter down. "He's threatening to file in an Ohio court," Stellan said, "which has no jurisdiction over a Montana marriage." "I know," she said. "But legal action is expensive to defend regardless of jurisdiction. He knows that." "He's counting on you not being able to afford the fight," Stellan said. "Yes." "He doesn't know that you're not fighting this alone," Stellan said. She looked at him. Something moved through her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. "Stellan, he made a threat against my household," Stellan said flatly. "That's what this is. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know this situation. He's making a legal threat against someone on my land and under my name." He picked up the letter and folded it. "I'm going to write to an attorney I know in Helena. We'll respond formally within the week." "This isn't your problem," she said. "You are my wife," he said. And then, as if the word surprised him too, he paused. Set the letter down again. Looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Not composed, not guarded, just open. Raw in the way people only get when something has slipped past their defenses before they noticed it moving. "Under Montana law," he added. "Under Montana law," she agreed quietly. But they both understood that something had just been said that had nothing to do with law. Dutch found out about Mace's letter because Dutch found out about everything. Eventually, not through nosiness, but through the particular attentiveness of a man who had worked the same land for 20 years and knew when the air in a house had changed. "There's someone coming after her," Dutch said to Stellan the next morning in the barn, where they had their real conversations. "Not anymore," Stellan said. "You talk to her." "I'm handling it." Dutch was quiet for a moment. "You know when you put that advertisement in," he said, I thought you'd end up with someone scared and small who would just fade into the corners of this place. And I thought that would be better than the silence, so I didn't say anything." Stellan kept working. "I was wrong," Dutch said. "About what you needed. Not about the silence being bad, I was right about that. But about what the solution was. You didn't need someone small. Dutch, you needed someone who could hold ground alongside you," Dutch said. "Someone with enough spine to not disappear when this land gets hard." Stellan set down what he was holding. "Say what you're actually saying." Dutch looked at him steadily. "Don't let that woman think she's only here because of the law," he said. "That would be a waste of something real." Stellan picked up what he'd set down and went back to work. But his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was processing something he didn't have words for, yet working through it, the way he worked through a hard fence line, methodically, quietly, not stopping until he got to the other side. Judd. The day the Caldwell Ranch burned, everything changed. They smelled the smoke first. Clara was in the kitchen and Stellan was outside, and they both stopped at exactly the same moment, her at the window, him in the yard, and looked north. The sky in that direction had gone the color of a bruise. Stellan was on his horse in 3 minutes. He told Clara to stay. She saddled the second horse in 4. He turned around when he heard her come up behind him, and his expression flashed through about 4 different things in rapid succession, and she held his gaze and said simply, "You might need another pair of hands." He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. "Stay close," he said. They rode north together. The Caldwell Ranch was not salvageable by the time they arrived. The main structure was fully engaged, and the heat was keeping everyone back. Ned Caldwell was standing 40 yards from his own house watching it burn, with the expression of a man who had just lost a decade of his life. Clara got down from her horse and went directly to Ned's wife Miriam, who was standing with 3 children, and a look on her face that Clara recognized that specific blank shock of a woman who was still deciding whether she was allowed to fall apart. "Come here," Clara said, and took Miriam's arm and moved her away from the fire, and the children followed, and Clara talked to her in a low, continuous voice, about nothing important, just kept her tethered to something real, while the men worked out what could be salvaged. Stellan worked with the Caldwell hands for 3 hours. Clara watched him between attending to Miriam and the children, saw the way he organized the effort, the economy of his movement, the way the other men looked to him without him asking for it. On the ride home, when the dark had come down fully, and the Caldwells were settled temporarily at a neighbor's place, Clara said, "It wasn't an accident." Stellan glanced at her. "The fire started in 2 places," she said. "You can tell by the burn pattern, the east corner and the south wall. Accidents don't start in 2 corners simultaneously." He was quiet for a long moment. "The Caldwells aren't the first," he said. "There were 2 other fires this fall. Both ranches sold within a month of the burning." "Sold to whom?" she said. He looked at her in the dark. "A land company out of Billings," he said. "I don't know who's behind it yet." Clara thought about wills, about the railroad survey, about the creek. "The railroad route," she said. She felt him go still in the saddle beside her. "Someone is buying up the land the railroad needs," she said. "Not negotiating for it, burning it into submission." The night around them was very quiet. "Stellan," she said. "They're going to come for this land." He didn't answer for a long time. They rode through the dark and the cold and the vast Montana silence, and Clara felt very clearly that the shape of the next few months was being decided in this moment, not by either of them, but by something larger that was moving toward them across the valley, whether they were ready for it or not. "I know," he said finally. She looked at him. His profile in the darkness was set and certain, not afraid exactly, but fully awake to what was coming. "Then we need to be ready," she said. "Yes?" he said. He didn't say "we like it" surprised him this time. He said it the way you say a word that has settled into its proper meaning, like it had always been true, and he'd simply finally stopped arguing with it. They didn't have to wait long. 4 days after the Caldwell fire, a man rode up to the property line at noon, not from the direction of town, not from the Wills spread, but from the north, which meant he'd come across open range and hadn't used the road. That alone told Stellan something. People who used the road had nothing to hide. People who crossed open range at noon were making a point about how they traveled. Stellan was at the fence line when the man arrived. Clara was 20 yards behind him carrying water to the post hole work, and she stopped when she saw the rider. The man was well dressed for the territory. That was the first thing. Clean coat, good horse, no trail dust. He'd come from somewhere close, which meant he'd been somewhere close and hadn't announced himself. "Stellan Voss," he said. "That's right," Stellan said. "My name is Garrett Hume. I represent the Western Territorial Land Development Company out of Billings." He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, for a document. though Stellan's hand moved anyway, and the man noticed and slowed his reach deliberately. "I'd like to talk to you about a purchase offer on this property." Stellan looked at the document the man was holding out. He didn't take it. "This land isn't for sale," he said. "Mr. Voss, I haven't told you the figure yet. The figure won't change my answer." Hume looked past Stellan and found Clara standing behind him watching. He looked at her for a moment with the calculating attention of someone filing information. "Perhaps your wife would like to hear the offer," he said. "It's substantial." "My wife's answer will be the same as mine," Stellan said. "Ma'am," Hume said directly to Clara, bypassing Stellan entirely. "I'd encourage you to consider." "My husband said no," Clara said. Her voice was pleasant and completely without give. "We both did. Is there anything else?" Hume looked between them. He rolled the document back up with slow, deliberate movements. "The offer has an expiration," he said. 2 weeks. After that, the terms change." He paused just long enough to let the weight of that settle. "I hope you'll reconsider." He turned his horse and rode back north the way he'd come. Clara walked up beside Stellan, and they both watched the rider until he disappeared over the rise. "Western Territorial Land Development," she said. "Never heard of them before this fall," Stellan said. "That's because they didn't exist before this fall," she said. "Shell company. Someone created it to buy up the valley without putting their own name on the transactions." She looked at him. "This is bigger than one railroad survey, Stellan. Someone has been planning this for a long time." He stood very still. "The Caldwells sold last week," he said quietly. "Miriam told me when I checked on them." "Of course they sold," Clara said. "They had 3 children, no house, and winter coming. They had no choice." A pause. "That's the point. The fires don't happen by accident, and the timing isn't random. They burn the ones who are most vulnerable first, the ones who can't hold out. And then they come for the ones who can," Stellan said. "Yes," she said. "With an offer first, then something else." He looked at her. "What do you mean something else?" She held his gaze. "Hume said the terms change after 2 weeks," she said. "He wasn't talking about the price." The wind came across the open range hard and flat and cold, and neither of them moved. Stellan rode to town the next morning and came back with 2 things: a letter he'd sent to his attorney in Helena and the name of a man. The name was Edmund Farrow. He was the majority owner of Western Territorial Land Development Company, registered in the Billings County records that Stellan had gone to the clerk's office to inspect personally. Farrow was not a rancher, not a railroad man. He was a speculator, the kind of man who never touched land himself, but understood exactly what it was worth and to whom, and moved between those 2 points of knowledge like a current finding the lowest ground. "Farrow," Clara said, turning the name over. "Is he local?" "Helena originally," Stellan said. "But he's been operating in the valley for 6 months at least, maybe longer." "Long enough to know which ranches were struggling," Clara said. "Long enough to watch and wait before he moved." "The fires started in October," Stellan said. "First one was the McCready place. They were carrying debt, missed 2 payments. 3 weeks after the fire, they sold to Western Territorial." "Who told you about McCready?" "Wills," he said. She looked up from the table. "Wills told you." "He came by this morning before I left for town," Stellan said. "I didn't have a chance to tell you. He's worried. Farrow's man has been to his property twice." "Wills won't sell," Clara said. "No, but he's also not positioned to fight, and he knows it." Stellan sat down across from her. "He asked if I'd be willing to talk to a few of the other ranchers. Organize something." "He asked you," she said. "Not the other way around." "Yes." Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. "He respects you," she said. "Enough to ask for help, even though it costs him something. That's not nothing from a man like Wills." "I know." "Stellan," she said. "How many ranches in this valley are there that haven't sold yet?" he thought. 9. Maybe 10 with the Gustafson place if the old man hasn't made a decision yet. How many of those are vulnerable, "Debt small operation, no extended family nearby. 5, he said. Maybe 6. So Pharaoh has 5 or 6 more fires to set before he controls enough of the valley to make the railroad deal," she said. "And he's running out of time because the survey window closes in the spring." She looked at him directly. "He's going to move fast, Stellan. Whatever he's planning next, it won't wait 2 weeks." Stellan put both hands flat on the table. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need to talk to all 9 ranchers before Pharaoh's men do," she said. "Together. Not as neighbors sharing concern. As an organized group with a legal position." He looked at her carefully. "You want to form a coalition. I want to form a wall," she said. "Pharaoh can buy 1 ranch, maybe 2. He can threaten isolated people. He cannot threaten 10 ranchers standing together with documentation, legal counsel, and witnesses." The kitchen was very quiet. "You'd need to be the one to call the meeting," she said. "They know you. They'll come if you ask." "And then," he said. "And then I'll talk to them," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Not with doubt, she'd learned to read the difference between his doubt and his assessment, and this was assessment. "All right," he said. They had 4 days of hard peace before the wolves came. Not figuratively. Actually, a pack 8 or 9 strong had been moving down from the high ground with the dropping temperatures, and they hit the north herd on a Wednesday night when the wind was loud enough to cover their approach and the cold was deep enough to have driven the cattle tight together in the shelter corner of the north field. Stellan heard the cattle first. He was out of bed and pulling on his boots before he was fully awake, the sound reaching him through sleep the way it does when you've spent years listening for exactly that kind of disturbance. Clara was in the hallway before he reached it. "North field," he said. "I know," she said. She already had her coat. She was already moving. He didn't tell her to stay. He'd stopped doing that. They went out together into a night that was so cold it hurt to breathe, and Dutch was already ahead of them with a lantern. And the sound from the north field was bad. The cattle were panicking, which meant the pack was already in among them. What happened in the next 40 minutes was something Clara would not be able to fully reconstruct afterward, because it happened in fragments, cold and dark, and noise, and the terrible efficient chaos of predators doing what predators do. She remembered the rifle in her hands. She remembered the shots, hers and Stellan's and Dutch's, and the way the muzzle flash turned the dark into a brief, terrible daylight. She remembered a wolf that came at her from the left, not at the cattle, but at her, and the way she turned and fired without thinking, because her body had been trained by her father on a farm where things tried to kill you sometimes, and you didn't have the luxury of hesitation. She remembered Stellan's voice shouting her name. And she remembered afterward, when it was over, and the pack had broken and run, standing in the cold dark, with the rifle still in her hands, and Stellan coming to her. Not carefully, not with the measured approach he usually used, but fast, crossing the ground between them, at something close to a run, and stopping just in front of her, and putting his hand on her face, her jaw just holding it there for a moment, checking. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was rough. "No," she said. His hand stayed on her jaw for another second. She could feel his thumb near her cheekbone, and she was aware that he was breathing harder than the exertion alone explained. "You turned fast," he said. "I saw you turn." "It was coming from the left," she said. "I know." He dropped his hand, stepped back, looked at her in the lantern light that Dutch was holding 20 feet away with the careful discretion of a man who understood the moment he was adjacent to. "You've handled a rifle before." "My father taught me," she said, "on the farm before it failed. He said a woman alone in the country needed to know how to protect herself." Stellan was quiet for a moment. "Smart man," he said. "He had his moments," she said. Something moved through his expression, something she'd been watching develop over weeks and was only now close enough to its surface to see clearly. He opened his mouth, and she thought for a moment he was going to say something that would change the shape of things between them permanently. Then Dutch called from across the field. "We lost 2 head, maybe 3, hard to count in this dark," and the moment folded back into the practical, the way moments always do on a working ranch where the land doesn't pause for feeling. "Let's count," Stellan said. They counted. The meeting with the ranchers happened on a Saturday at the Voss property because Stellan had the largest kitchen table, and Clara had made the case that people made better decisions when they weren't cold and standing. 7 of the 9 remaining Valley ranchers came. The other 2 sent word they were interested, but wary, which Clara noted as potentially persuadable rather than lost. Wills came. He sat at the far end of the table with his hat in his hands, which was the most humble she'd ever seen him, and he said almost nothing for the first half of the meeting, which told her he was taking it seriously. Stellan opened it. He was not a man given to speeches, he said so himself at the outset, which got a genuine response from the room because it was true, and they all knew it and respected the honesty of it. He laid out what he knew Pharaoh's company, the purchase pattern, the fires, the railroad connection, the timeline. Then he looked at Clara and said, "My wife has something to say." 7 men looked at her, some curious, some skeptical. Wills with an expression she couldn't quite read. She stood. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," she said. "I'm going to tell you what's happening and what your options are, and you can decide for yourselves. That's all." She walked them through it. The railroad survey, the spring deadline, Pharaohs need to control the water access points before the route was finalized. The pattern of targeting the most financially exposed ranches first. The 2-week offer expiration that Hume had mentioned, and what she believed it actually meant. "He's not going to change the price after 2 weeks," she said. "He's going to change the method. The offer was a formality. He already knows most of you won't take it." "Then what's he going to do?" said a rancher named Gustafson, who was old enough to have seen most kinds of trouble and had the expression of a man pricing out the current variety. "I don't know exactly," Clara said honestly, "but the fires have been property. The next step, if the pattern holds, will be something more personal." The room got very quiet. "More personal how?" Gustafson said. "Livestock," she said. "Water supply contamination. Accidents that aren't accidents." She looked around the table. "Things that are harder to prove than a fire, but just as effective at making a family decide they're done." "We can't prove the fires were deliberate," another rancher said. His name was Hartley, and he had the tight-wound look of a man who wanted to fight but needed permission. "Not yet," Clara said. "But we can document what we know and build a legal record. The Helena attorney Stellan has retained can file a protective injunction against Western Territorial that slows their acquisition process and brings outside scrutiny to what they're doing. An injunction costs money," Will said. From the far end of the table, first thing he'd said. "Split 9 ways it's manageable," Clara said. "Split between the 4 or 5 who can carry more, it's still manageable. Nobody goes broke protecting what they have." Wills looked at her for a long moment. "You've done this before," he said. "This kind of fight." "Not this exact kind," she said. "But I've watched land get taken from people who didn't organize fast enough to stop it." A pause. "I won't watch it happen here." Another silence. Longer. Then Gustafson put both hands flat on the table, the same gesture Stellan used Clara noticed when he'd made a decision, and said, "I'm in." Hartley said in. 2 more quickly. Wills was last. He looked at Stellan first. Something passed between them, the acknowledgement of a grudge being set aside, not forgotten, just deprioritized by a larger threat. "In," Wills said. Clara sat down. Under the table, Stellan's hand found hers and pressed it once quickly and released. She kept her face still, but she felt it all the way up her arm and into her chest, where it settled somewhere it had never been before. 2 days later, they found the first contaminated water. It was in the East Trough, which fed from a secondary pipe off the main well line. Dutch found 3 cattle standing away from it, which was the first sign, and when he checked the water, it smelled wrong. Not sewage wrong, chemical wrong. He got Stellan. Stellan got Clara. She smelled it and stepped back and said, "Lie," or something similar. Diluted enough to be slow-acting, but concentrated enough to sicken the cattle within a few days. Someone accessed the line, Stellan said. His voice was very controlled in the way it got when he was extremely angry. Last night, Dutch said. Or early this morning. The cattle weren't showing avoidance yesterday afternoon. It's starting, Clara said. Stellan looked at her. She could see the controlled anger in his face, and underneath it, something that was not fear but was adjacent to it, the specific dread of a man watching something he built be threatened by something he can't yet put his hands on. We need to isolate the water line, she said. Manually check every trough and tank before the cattle access them every single day until this is resolved. That's 2 extra hours of work daily, Dutch said. Yes, she said. It is. I'll take the morning check, Dutch said. Not a question. A statement of what was going to happen. I'll take the afternoon, Clara said. Stellan looked between them. Then he said, I'm sending a rider to Hartley and Wills today. They need to check their water. And file it, Clara said. Every incident. Date, time, description, any evidence. This is the legal record being built. He nodded. Already moving. Already reaching for his coat. Already in the mode she'd come to recognize as Stellan Voss, in a state of absolute determined motion. Clara, he said at the door. Yes. Write up what you observed. Everything. Details. Already planning to, she said. He left. Dutch looked at her across the kitchen. They're escalating, he said. Yes, she said. Are you scared? She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things. Yes, she said, but not in a way that slows me down. Dutch nodded slowly. Good kind of scared, he said. Only kind worth having, she agreed. The letter from Harlan Mace came again. Second one. It arrived the same week as the water contamination, which Clara noted grimly as the kind of timing that was probably coincidental, but felt like the universe making a point. This letter was shorter than the first. It said that Orrin Pell had filed a petition in an Ohio court challenging the validity of her marriage, and that unless she agreed to return to Columbus voluntarily within 30 days, he would pursue the matter through all available legal channels. She sat with it for an hour before she showed it to Stellan. He read it, set it down, picked it up, and read it again. He filed, Stellan said. Yes. An Ohio court has no standing over a Montana marriage, he said. My attorney told me this already. His attorney knows that too, Clara said. This isn't about winning the case. It's about making the case expensive and exhausting enough that I give up and go back. Stellan was very quiet for a long time. Clara, he said finally. Why did you leave him? She had known this question was coming. She had known since the first letter that eventually she would have to answer it completely, not in the partial way she had before. He wasn't violent, she said. I want to say that first because I know that's the question behind the question. She looked at her hands on the table. He was the kind of man who needed to own things completely. Every person in his life existed on terms he defined. My father owed him money, a significant debt from a failed business. When my father died, Orrin offered to forgive the debt in exchange for the engagement. Stellan said nothing. I could have refused, she said. Technically, but refusing meant my mother and my sister inherited the debt, and Orrin made very clear what pursuing that debt would look like. She looked up. It wasn't a choice. It was a transaction. And I decided that if I was going to be a transaction, I would at least choose the transaction that put me somewhere I might be able to build something real. The kitchen held the silence of two people sitting with something that had weight. So you chose Montana, Stellan said. I chose the furthest option available, she said. Montana came with the right set of terms. He looked at her. And now? She held his gaze. Now Montana has become something I didn't plan for, she said. And I'm not leaving it. Something crossed his face fast, almost hidden, but she caught it. A flash of something unguarded and unmanaged and completely real. I'm going to write to my attorney tonight, he said. We're going to shut this down legally and permanently. He paused. "And I'm going to need you to tell me everything about Orrin Pell. Every detail you know, because men like that don't stop with letters." "I know," she said. "Are you ready to tell me?" She thought of what it would cost to say it all out loud. Then she thought of the wolves and the rifle in her hands, and the cold dark of that night, and how she had turned and fired without hesitation, because her body had learned that hesitation was the thing that killed you. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." He pulled his chair closer to the table. He opened the ledger he used for notes and uncapped his pen and looked at her with the focused, serious attention of a man preparing to understand something completely. And Clara Falcon, who had come to Montana running, began to speak. She talked for a long time. He didn't interrupt once. Outside, the temperature dropped to the lowest it had been since her arrival, and the wind off the mountains hit the house in sustained waves that rattled the windows in their frames. Inside, the fire held. The lamp held. And Stellan Voss, who had once wanted a quiet woman who would not question him, sat across the table from the fiercest woman he had ever met and listened to her like every word was land he was learning the shape of, like he intended to know every inch of it, like he wasn't going anywhere either. Stellan's attorney in Helena was named Robert Kane, and he arrived 3 days after Stellan's urgent letter reached him, which told Clara two things: that the man took the situation seriously, and that Stellan had enough standing with him to make that kind of urgency land. Kane was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, sharp-eyed with the particular economy of movement that belonged to men who spent their days managing large amounts of information under pressure. He came in, took off his coat, sat down at the kitchen table, and looked at the stack of documents Clara had prepared: the incident log, the water contamination records, the copies of Mace's letters, the notes from the rancher meeting, the Western Territorial registration she'd had Stellan pull from the county clerk, and was quiet for a long moment. "You put this together," he said to Clara. "We put it together," she said. Stellan pulled the county records. Dutch witnessed the contamination events. I organized the documentation. Kane looked at Stellan. "Your letter said your wife had a legal mind." "I said she was thorough," Stellan said. "Same thing." Kane said and picked up the incident log. He read for 10 minutes without speaking. Clara refilled his coffee once. He didn't look up. Finally, he set the papers down. "The Ohio petition is weak," he said, "jurisdictionally and factually. An Ohio court cannot invalidate a marriage contracted and registered under Montana territorial law. Pell's attorney knows this. They're filing for pressure, not for outcome." "Can we shut it down?" Stellan said. "I'll file a motion to dismiss on jurisdictional grounds within the week," Kane said. "That should end it. If Pell's attorney is competent, they'll withdraw rather than lose on record." He paused. "The land situation is more complex. What you have here," he tapped the incident log, "is a pattern. But pattern isn't proof. A good defense attorney takes each incident individually and argues coincidence." "So what do we need?" Clara said. "Connection," Kane said. "Something that ties Farrow directly to the fires or the contamination. A witness. A document. A financial transaction that puts his money at the scene." He looked between them. "Do you have any of that?" Silence. "Not yet," Clara said. "Then that's what we need," Kane said simply. "Keep documenting everything. Every incident, every visit from Hume, or anyone connected to Western Territorial, every conversation. Date-time witnesses. You're building a case, even if it doesn't feel like it yet." He closed his folder. "And the coalition, the other ranchers. That matters. Collective legal action is significantly harder to dismiss than individual complaints." "We have 7 committed," Clara said. 2 more who are interested." "Get the 2, Kane said. 9 ranchers filing a joint complaint against a land company for coordinated harassment and property damage, that's a story. That's something a territorial judge takes seriously." He stayed for supper. Dutch made a point of being at the table, which was unusual, and Clara understood it was his way of showing Kane the full weight of the household behind this effort. Kane asked questions about the valley, the other ranchers, the geography of the land in question. Clara answered most of them. Stellan answered the ones that required knowledge of the physical land. At one point, Kane looked between them with an expression of mild professional admiration and said, "You two think well together." Neither of them responded to that directly. But under the table, Stellan's boot pressed briefly against Clara's, and she felt it, and she kept her face perfectly composed, and inside something warm and certain moved through her like a current finding its channel. The night Kane left Stellan didn't go to bed. Clara found him at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock, the lamp turned low, the incident log open in front of him, but his eyes not on it. He was looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man working through something that didn't have a clean solution. She sat down across from him without asking if he wanted company. By now, they'd established without discussing it that some silences were shared. "Kane thinks we have a real case," she said. "I know," he said. "That's not what I'm thinking about." She waited. "After this is over," he said. "One way or another, after Pharaoh is dealt with, after the Pell situation is closed, what do you want?" She looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" "You came here running," he said. Not unkindly, just directly the way he said most things. "You told me why. You told me what you were escaping. But you never told me what you were running toward, if anything." She was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't running toward anything," she said. "I was running away from a life that was going to swallow me whole if I stayed. And now?" She looked at the table, at the lamp, at her own hands. "Now I'm somewhere I didn't expect to be," she said. "Somewhere that feels—" She stopped. Started again. "When I came here, I thought I would endure this. I thought I would manage it and be useful and survive it, and that would be enough. And it's not enough," he said. She looked up at him. "It's not what it is," she said. "What it is more than I planned for." Stellan was very still. "I'm not good at this," he said. His voice had changed. The careful management of it was gone, replaced by something unprocessed and real. Saying things. The interior things. I've spent a long time making sure the interior things stayed interior. "I know," she said. "My first year on this land," he said. "I almost lost it. I told you that. But what I didn't tell you was that I almost lost it because I trusted someone. A business partner. Man I thought I knew." He looked at the table. "He took money that was supposed to go to the cattle purchase and disappeared. Left me with nothing but land and debt and a winter coming." A pause. "After that I decided that the fewer people who had access to the real workings of things, the fewer opportunities there were for that kind of loss." "You shut everyone out," she said. "I ran things efficiently," he said. "Same thing," she said, echoing Kane's words from earlier without meaning to, and something shifted in Stellan's expression, the ghost of a real smile, brief and unguarded. "Same thing," he agreed. She looked at him across the lamp's low light. "Stellan, what do you want?" "After this is over." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said very quietly, "I want what's already here." She felt that land somewhere in her chest. "I want the accounts at the kitchen table," he said. "I want someone who tells me the roof is cracked before it falls. I want—" He stopped. "I want to stop coming home to a house that's just a building and starting to come home to something else." He looked at her directly, and the openness in his face cost him something. She could see that it did. "I want you to stop thinking of yourself as a practical arrangement." The lamp flame moved in a draft from somewhere in the walls. Neither of them moved. "I stopped thinking of myself as a practical arrangement," she said, "approximately 3 weeks after I arrived." Something broke open in his expression. Not dramatically, just a giving way. The way ice gives way in the first real warmth of spring, not all at once, but at the edges irreversibly. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held it. They sat like that for a long time in the quiet of the house, while the Montana wind did what it always did. Testing, pressing, looking for the place where things might give. It didn't find one. The connection Kane needed came from an unexpected direction. It came from Will's. He rode over on a Monday morning, which was unusual, and he came alone, which was more unusual, and when Dutch brought him in and Clara offered coffee, he took it and sat down and said without preamble, "I know who Pharaoh is using." Stellan went still. "Say that again." "The man doing the actual work," Will said. "The fire's the contamination. His name is Cord Beale. He's been operating out of a line camp north of the valley for the past 3 months. I recognized him last week. He rode past my east fence line, and I couldn't place him at first, but it came to me later. I've seen him before. 2 years ago outside of Miles City. There was a land dispute. A family lost their property under circumstances that everyone agreed were wrong, but nobody could prove." "You're saying Beale is a professional," Clara said. "I'm saying he does this for money, and he's been doing it long enough to be careful," Will said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I don't have proof of any of it, but I know he's there, and I know the camp location, and that's more than you had yesterday." Stellan looked at Clara. She was already thinking. "A line camp north of the valley," she said. "If Beale's been there 3 months, he has supplies coming in. Someone is bringing them. That's a transaction. Transactions leave records." "The supply store in Creston," Stellan said slowly. "If someone's stocking a camp that regularly they're buying in volume." "Creston keeps a ledger," Clara said. "Every transaction, state requirement." "You want to look at their ledger?" Will said. "I want Kane to look at their ledger," Clara said. "With legal standing. If Beale is purchasing under his own name, or if anyone connected to Western Territorial is paying for those supplies, that's the connection we need." Wills looked at her steadily. He had been looking at her like this more often lately, not with the original skepticism, but with something that looked like grudging respect that was becoming less grudging. "You think fast," he said. "I've had to," she said. He nodded once, looked at Stellan. "I should have come to you sooner about the water easement," he said. Not exactly an apology. Wills wasn't built for exact apologies, but something structurally similar. "I handled that badly." "We both handled it badly," Stellan said. "I handled it worse," Wills said with the precision of a man who believed in accurate accounting even when it cost him. "The easement, if you're willing to negotiate proper terms, I'd like to settle it legally, before all this other business gets worse." "Come back Thursday," Stellan said. "We'll put it on paper." Wills nodded, set down his coffee cup and stood. He looked at Clara one more time. "Your wife," he said to Stellan, "is the reason this valley isn't already half sold." He put on his hat. "I'm not sure you know that fully yet." He left. Stellan looked at Clara. "He's not wrong," he said. "He's somewhat right," she said. "You're the reason they trust it. I'm the reason it's organized." She looked at him. "That's what a partnership is." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he went to write to Kane about the Creston ledger. Kane moved faster than either of them expected. He had the legal standing to request the Creston supply ledger within 48 hours, not a full subpoena, but a formal inquiry backed by the collective complaint the 9 ranchers had now signed. The store owner cooperated without argument, which Kane said suggested he'd been uneasy about the account in question and was relieved to have a legal reason to surface it. The account was registered under a name that meant nothing: TL Holdings. But the payment drafts, bank drafts, not cash, traced back to an account at the First Territorial Bank of Billings, the same bank that processed Western Territorial Land Development Company's transactions. It wasn't a direct line to Pharaoh, but it was a line, and Kane said a line was enough to file. "He'll know we filed," Clara said when Kane sent word. "The moment the complaint is submitted, Pharaoh knows." "Yes," Stellan said. "Which means whatever he was planning to do next, he'll move it forward," she said. "We won't get the 2 weeks Hume mentioned. We'll get days." "I know." She looked at him. "We need to be ready for something to happen." "I know," he said again. "I've already talked to Dutch. We're doubling the water checks, moving the most valuable cattle to the south pasture, and I asked Hartley to send one of his hands to stay in our north bunkhouse temporarily." She hadn't known about that last part. She looked at him. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her. "About not fighting alone, about the wall." He held her gaze. "I've been doing things alone for a long time. I'm trying to stop." "You're doing well at it," she said. "I'm doing adequately at it," he said. "You're doing well at it. There's a difference." She felt the side of her mouth move. "That might be the most precise compliment I've ever received." "I'm a precise man," he said. "You are," she agreed. "And she said it the way you say something that is not just an observation, but an acknowledgement, the way you say "I see you" without saying those words. The thing that happened was not fire. It came in the form of two men and a document which was in some ways worse than fire, because fire at least announced itself. They arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, not Hume this time, but two men Clara hadn't seen before, and they had a county sheriff's deputy with them, which was the part that made her stomach drop. She was at the main house alone. Stellan was in the south pasture Dutch with him. She met them at the door. The taller of the two men introduced himself as a process server from the Billings County Court. He had a document. He held it out. She took it and read it standing in the doorway. It was an injunction, not theirs Pharaoh's, filed against Stellan Voss and 7 named co-plaintiffs alleging that the joint complaint submitted by their attorney constituted defamation of Western Territorial Land Development Company and tortious interference with lawful business operations. The injunction sought to suspend the joint complaint pending a hearing. She looked up at the process server. "My husband will need to see this," she said. Her voice was completely steady. "He's on the property. Can you wait, or shall I bring it to him?" "We'll wait," the man said. She walked them to the porch and went to find Stellan. She covered the ground between the house and the south pasture at something close to a run, and when Stellan saw her coming, he was already moving toward her before she reached him, reading her face the way he'd learned to read it over the past weeks. She handed him the document without speaking. He read it. His jaw tightened. She watched the controlled anger move through him. "He counterfiled," Stellan said. "He's trying to kill our complaint before the hearing," she said. "If he gets this injunction sustained, the joint filing is suspended. We lose the legal pressure, and he goes back to having free operational space. Can he get it sustained?" "Kane needs to know immediately," she said. But Stellan listened to me. This is what desperate looks like. This is a man who saw the complaint filed and panicked. You don't counterfile with a defamation claim unless you're scared of what the original complaint contains. He looked at her. "We got to him," she said. "This is proof of that." Something moved through his expression. Not relief, not yet, but the recalibration of a man who has just understood that the fight is going the right direction, even when it looks like it's getting worse. "Go tell the men I'm coming," he said. "I'll deal with the process server and ride to town to wire Kane." "I'll wire Kane," she said. "You stay here. We can't leave the property unattended right now, and you know that." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Clara, I know the case better than anyone except Kane," she said. "I know what to tell him. I know what to ask him." She looked at him steadily. "Let me do this." A long moment, the kind of moment that had a shape to it, the shape of a man deciding whether to keep holding something alone or to set half of it down and trust another person to carry it. "Wire him tonight's address," Stellan said. "Tell him I want a response before morning." "I will," she said. "And Clara." He caught her hand as she turned. Just briefly, just a grip, then release. "Come back safe." She looked at him. "Always," she said. She rode to town alone in the cold, with the document in her coat, and her mind already organizing the wire she was going to send, and the argument Kane would need to make, and the countermoves available to them. She rode fast, because fast was what the situation required, and because somewhere behind her she'd left a man who had asked her to come back safe, and that small, careful, enormous thing was worth riding fast for. Kane's response came before midnight. He had already anticipated the counterfiling. He called it a delay tactic dressed as a legal argument and said he would have a response motion filed by Friday that would expose the defamation claim as procedurally hollow. He also said, and this was the part that made Clara's breath catch, that in reviewing the Creston Ledger transaction records he had found a second account. One that traced not to TL Holdings but to a personal bank account. And the name on that account was not Cord Beale. It was Harding Wills. She read the wire 3 times. Her hands were steady, but her mind was running fast through everything she knew about Wills. Every conversation, every meeting, every careful word. The water easement. The way he'd come to Stellan asking for the meeting. The information he'd volunteered about Beale. She thought he gave us Beale. She thought, why would he give us Beale if he was working with Pharaoh? She thought because giving us Beale cost him nothing if Beale had already done his work. And because giving us Beale put him on the right side of the alliance when the dust settled. She rode home through the dark with the wire in her coat, and every mile of it she was working through what this meant and what to do with it. And by the time she came into the yard and saw the light still on in the kitchen, she had it sorted. Stellan was at the table when she came in. He looked at her face and knew immediately that something had changed. She sat down. She put Kane's wire on the table. He read it. She watched his face do the same work hers had done on the road. Wills, he said. Flat. Wait, she said. Think it through. He's been working with Pharaoh. Possibly, she said. Or he was approached by Pharaoh and took money and then realized which way this was going to go and switched sides. She looked at him. His account pays for Beale's supplies, but he also came to us with Beale's name and location. That's not the behavior of a man committed to Pharaoh's plan. It's the behavior of a man covering himself, Stellan said. Yes, she said. Which means he's afraid. Which means he's persuadable. Stellan stared at her. You want to use this? I want to use him, she said. Carefully. If Wills is frightened enough about his exposure, he'll give us something better than a supply ledger. He'll give us direct testimony. She held Stellan's gaze. A witness who was inside Pharaoh's operation and will testify to what he saw that ends this. Not just the injunction, the whole operation. The kitchen was very quiet. You want me to go to Wills, Stellan said. Tomorrow morning, she said. Before Kane's response is filed. Before Pharaoh has any reason to believe we know about the account. She paused. And Stellan go alone. Don't take Dutch. Wills needs to feel like this is a private conversation between 2 men who have a history, not a confrontation. Stellan thought about it. She could see him thinking the particular stillness of it, the way his eyes went slightly unfocused when he was working through a problem completely. What if he refuses? He said. Then we go to Kane with the account record and let the legal process do what it does, she said. But I don't think he'll refuse. I think he came to us with Beale's name because some part of him was already looking for a way out. Another long silence. You read people well, he said. I've had to, she said. 3rd time she'd said those words in as many weeks. Each time true in a different, deeper way. He reached across and took the wire and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he looked at her across the table. Really looked at her the way he'd started doing, the way that had no guardedness in it. When I wrote that advertisement, he said, I asked for someone sensible. I remember, she said. I significantly undersold what I needed, he said. She felt her chest do the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency, that warm, certain settling, like something coming home to a place it was always supposed to be. You didn't know yet, she said. No, he said. I didn't. A pause. I know now. He stood. He moved around the table. Not quickly, not with any of the efficiency that characterized most of how he moved through his own house, and he stopped beside her chair and looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and the space between them had changed from what it had been even 2 weeks ago, had narrowed, had become something different in its quality. He put his hand against her face, the way he had in the North Field that night, the night of the wolves, the night she had turned and fired, and he had come to her running. Only this time, there was no pretense of checking for injury. This time, it was just his hand and her face, and the specific weight of a moment that had been building for 2 months. She put her hand over his. They stayed like that for a moment that had no practical function and every possible meaning. Then he said quietly, "I'll ride to Will's at first light." "I'll have coffee ready," she said. He nodded. He went to his room. She sat at the table alone for another while in the low lamplight, and thought about how strange it was that she had come here with nothing but a trunk and a decision and the determination not to be swallowed whole, and had found instead a partnership that had grown from the soil of necessity into something she did not have adequate words for, something that felt for the first time in her adult life like ground that held. Outside, the Montana wind came down from the mountains and tested the walls and found them sound. Inside, the fire held as it always did, as she had decided from the very first night that it always would. Stellan rode to Will's at first light exactly as he'd said he would. Clara stood in the yard and watched him go, and then she went inside and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the incident log and Kane's wire and the counter-filing documents spread in front of her, and she read through everything one more time, the way you read through something when you want to make sure you haven't missed the thing that will matter most. She hadn't missed anything. The case was as strong as it was going to be without Will's testimony. But with it, with a witness who had direct knowledge of Pharaoh's operation, who had taken money, and could describe exactly how the arrangement worked, it became something different. Not just a strong case, a decisive one. Dutch came in from the morning water check and poured himself coffee and looked at the papers on the table and then at Clara. "He went to Will's," Dutch said. "Yes. You think Will's will cooperate?" "I think Will's is a man who made a calculation that went wrong and is smart enough to know it," she said. "Smart enough to take the exit when it's offered clearly." Dutch was quiet for a moment. "And if he doesn't?" "Then we proceed without him and the case takes longer," she said. "But we still win. It just costs more." Dutch sat down across from her. He wrapped both hands around his cup, the way he always did, and he looked at her with the expression she'd come to recognize as Dutch, preparing to say something he'd been holding for a while. "I want to tell you something," he said. She looked up. When Stellan put that advertisement in, Dutch said, "I was worried, not about who would come, about him, about what it would do to him if someone came and it was wrong, if it made things harder instead of better." He paused. "He doesn't show damage easily. But it's there. From the partner who took the money. From years of doing everything alone and calling it preference." "I know," Clara said quietly. "You pulled him out of something," Dutch said. "Not by trying to, just by being what you are and not apologizing for it." He looked at her steadily. "I've worked for that man for 20 years. I've never seen him ride to a neighbor asking for help. Never. He does everything alone, and he does it well, and he pays the cost of it privately." A pause. "He rode to Will's this morning because you told him it was the right move, and he trusted that. He trusted you." Clara was quiet for a moment. "He trusts the logic," she said. "He trusts you," Dutch said. "The logic is secondary." She looked down at the papers, looked back up. "Thank you, Dutch," she said. He nodded once and went back to his coffee, and neither of them said anything more about it because it had been said completely, and that was enough. Stellan came back 3 hours later. Clara heard the horse in the yard and was at the door before he'd dismounted. She read his face the moment he turned, and what she saw there was not relief, not triumph, but the particular composure of a man who had just been through something that required more of him than he'd expected. He came inside. He sat down. He accepted the coffee she put in front of him without comment. "He cried?" Stellan said. She sat down across from him and waited. "Not immediately. We talked for a long time first. He told me how Pharaoh approached him 8 months ago before any of this started. Said he was scouting investment opportunities in the valley and wanted local knowledge. Said he'd pay for information. Nothing illegal. Just information about which ranches were struggling, which owners might be open to selling, what the water situation looked like. Stellan set his cup down. Wills told himself it was harmless, that he was just being paid for knowledge any neighbor would have. And then the fire started, Clara said. And then the fire started, he said. And by then he'd taken enough money that he was exposed. He knew it. Pharaoh knew he knew it. A pause. Beale's supplies were run through Wills's account because Pharaoh wanted insurance. Wanted something that tied Wills to the operation so he couldn't turn. He turned anyway, Clara said. He turned anyway, Stellan said. When his daughter asked him why the Caldwells didn't have a home anymore, she's 7 years old. She asked him at supper one night why the Caldwell children were living at the Hartley place. He was quiet for a moment. He said he couldn't answer her. The kitchen held that. He'll testify, Clara said. Full testimony. Everything he knows about Pharaoh's operation. The payment arrangement, Beale's instructions, the specific properties targeted, and in what order. Stellan met her eyes. He also has documents. Payment records he kept, he said, because he knew from the beginning that he might need them. He was building his own exit before he knew how to use it. Clara let out a slow breath. That's everything Kane needs. That's everything Kane needs, he confirmed. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held it the way they'd learned to do, without ceremony, without announcement, just the simple fact of it. You did that well, she said. I told him the truth, he said. That we had the account records and we were going to proceed with or without him. That cooperating was the only path that didn't end with him losing everything alongside Pharaoh. He paused. And I told him his daughter deserved a father who answered hard questions instead of going quiet. She looked at him. That was the part that mattered, she said. Yes, he said. It was. Kane filed the response motion and Wills's initial testimony affidavit within 48 hours of each other, and the effect was immediate. Pharaoh's counter-injunction collapsed. The Billings court rejected it on procedural grounds and ordered a full hearing on the original joint complaint within 30 days. Pharaoh's attorney, apparently understanding what the Wills affidavit meant for the case, requested a 60-day extension. The judge denied it. Word traveled through the valley the way word always did in isolated country. Fast person to person, arriving at each ranch with a slightly different shape, but the same essential truth. Western Territorial was cornered. Pharaoh's operation had a witness inside it. The hearing was coming, and the outcome was not in his favor. Two things happened in the week that followed. The first was that Cord Beale left the line camp north of the valley and did not return. Kane was informed and said it didn't matter. Beale's physical presence was less important than Wills's documented testimony of the instructions Beale had been given, and by whom. The second was that Garrett Hume came back to the Voss property. Alone this time, no documents, no deputy. He came in the middle of the afternoon and asked to speak to Stellan, and Clara happened to be the first one he found, which by now had a familiar shape to it. Mr. Hume, she said. He looked at her, and something in his expression had changed from the last time. The professional smoothness of it was still there, but underneath it, something uncertain had appeared. Mrs. Voss, he said, first time he'd used her name. My husband is available, she said. Would you like to come in? He came in. Stellan was in the study. They sat at the kitchen table, all three of them, and Hume put his hat on his knee and said, I want you to know that my involvement was limited to the purchase offers. I delivered documents. I made presentations. I was not aware of the other activities. The fires, Clara said. He didn't flinch. The fires. The contamination. I did not know about those when I took the engagement. When I understood what the company's full operation was. He stopped. I want to be clear about the limits of my involvement. Are you looking for something from us? Stellan said. His voice was neutral, careful. I'm looking to be a cooperative witness, rather than a named respondent, Hume said. I have information about Pharaoh's financial structure. The railroad deal specifically, I was involved in those negotiations. I know the names of the rail company representatives he was working with and the terms they'd agreed to. Stellan looked at Clara. She gave him the smallest nod. "Talk to our attorney," Stellan said. "Robert Kane and Helena. Tell him everything you told us and everything you haven't. He'll determine how your cooperation fits the case." Hume stood, put on his hat. "Thank you," he said. He looked at Clara. "I heard what you did, organizing the ranchers, building the legal record." A pause. "Pharaoh didn't account for you. When he built his plan, he didn't put someone like you in it." "He should have," Clara said simply. Hume almost smiled. "Yes," he said. "He should have." He left. Dutch, who had been conspicuously busy near the doorway for the last 20 minutes, appeared fully in the kitchen the moment the sound of Hume's horse faded. "Was that the man who threatened you with changing terms 2 weeks ago?" Dutch said. "The same," Clara said. Dutch looked enormously satisfied. "Good," he said, and went back outside. The hearing was on a Thursday in early December, held in the Billings County Courthouse with a territorial judge named Aldrich, who Kane said had a reputation for impatience with what he called manufactured legal complexity, which was, Kane said, a good thing for them. Clara and Stellan rode to Billings together. The other ranchers came too, 7 of them filing into the courthouse with the particular unified presence of people who have been through something together and come out the other side of it still standing. Wills came. He sat in the second row and did not look comfortable, which was appropriate. Clara sat behind the bar next to Stellan and watched Kane work. He was very good. She'd known he was good from the first meeting, but in the courtroom it was something different. The precision of him, the way he laid the case, not as an argument, but as an inevitable logical conclusion that the judge was simply being invited to formalize. The supply ledger, the payment accounts, Wills's testimony, Hume's supplemental statement about the railroad negotiations. The incident log that Clara had maintained from the first week dated witnessed signed. Pharaoh's attorney objected 14 times. The judge sustained 2 of them. Pharaoh himself was in the room. Clara had not seen him before and found him in person somewhat disappointing, a compact man in an expensive coat with the eyes of someone who had always operated from a position of enough money to make consequences optional. He looked at Clara once across the room, with the assessing look of a man trying to understand where his plan had failed. She met his eyes directly. She didn't look away. He did. The judge delivered his ruling at 4 in the afternoon. He found sufficient evidence of coordinated property damage harassment and fraudulent business operations to issue a permanent injunction against Western Territorial Land Development Company, freeze the company's land acquisition activities in the valley pending full investigation, and refer the matter to the territorial prosecutor for criminal review of the fire incidents. He also awarded damages. Preliminary damages subject to the full proceeding, but real numbers attached to real properties payable by Western Territorial's registered accounts. The Caldwells, who had been in the back row, and who Clara had quietly arranged to attend through Miriam, held each other's hands when the number was read. Kane shook Stellan's hand. Then he turned to Clara and shook hers, which she appreciated because some men in his position would not have. "You built this case," he said quietly, under the noise of the room. "We built it," she said. "Every rancher in this room built it." "You organized it," he said. "There's a difference." She thought of what Dutch had said about Stellan trusting her, about how trust given by the right person in the right direction could hold a weight that nothing else could. "Thank you, Robert," she said. He nodded and went to deal with the procedural aftermath. Stellan found her in the corridor outside the courtroom while Kane was filing post-ruling documents and the other ranchers were doing the slow, loud work of processing a victory in a group. He stood in front of her and looked at her for a moment without speaking. "Orrin Pell's petition was dismissed this morning," he said. "Kane got the wire before we came in." Pell's attorney withdrew the filing. She had been steady all day through the hearing, through the ruling, through Pharaoh's defeated exit, and Miriam Caldwell's quiet tears in the back row. She had been steady because steady was what the day required. She felt something move through her now that was not steadiness. something looser and more complicated. "It's over," she said. "It's over," he confirmed. She exhaled slowly. He watched her do it. "Clara," he said. His voice was the quiet, unguarded version, the one that had taken weeks to appear, and now showed up with a regularity that still surprised her each time. "I know," she said. "I haven't said it," he said. "You've said it in about 40 different ways," she said. "That's not the same." She looked at him. He was standing in a courthouse corridor in Billings, with his hat in his hands, surrounded by the distant noise of a legal victory that he had helped build and that would protect everything he'd spent 15 years holding together alone. He looked like a man who had carried something very heavy for a very long time and had recently discovered he didn't have to carry it alone and was still getting used to what that felt like in his body. "Then say it," she said. "I love you," he said, straightforwardly. Without preamble or decoration, the way he did everything direct, precise, completely sincere. "I loved you before I knew I was doing it, which I suspect was your approach to most things." She felt it land in her chest, like something that had been traveling a long way and had finally arrived where it was always going. "I love you," she said. "I have for some time. I was waiting for you to catch up." Something broke completely open in his face, not painfully, not with the cost of earlier openings. This one came easy. This one had been ready. He stepped forward, and she stepped forward, and he held her in the corridor of the Billings County Courthouse, while somewhere behind them, Dutch said loudly to no one in particular, "About time," and Hartley told him to be quiet, and Wills surprisingly laughed. The Pell matter was formally closed within the month. Kane filed the dismissal documentation in Ohio and sent Clara a copy for her records, which she added to the household file she maintained, the file that now contained the revised loan documents, the cooperative feed agreement, the Wills water easement, the legal settlement with Western Territorial, and the initial payment notice for the Caldwell's damages award. She kept the file in the study. Stellan's study, which had become without either of them marking the exact moment their study. The desk had 2 chairs now. Farrow was formally charged in February by the territorial prosecutor. Cord Beal was located in Wyoming in March and extradited. Hume, having cooperated fully, was not charged but lost his license to practice as a land agent in the territory which Kane said was appropriate, and Clara thought was probably insufficient, but accepted as the nature of things. The Caldwells rebuilt. It took the spring and part of the summer with help from every ranch in the valley, and on the day Ned Caldwell walked back into his own new house, Clara stood in the yard next to Miriam, and neither of them said anything because nothing needed to be said. The railroad survey came through in April. The approved route used a water point on the north edge of the valley, not the Voss Creek. The land Farrow had been trying to acquire turned out to be secondary to the route the surveyors ultimately chose, which meant his entire operation had been built on an assumption that the engineers didn't share. Stellan told Clara this with a flatness in his voice that was the equivalent for him of dark humor.